Yes, sir, we are live now.
So should we start, Jitendra, sir?
Sir, wait.
Right, sir. Right, sir.
Sir, Jitendra sir, हाँ. Yes, sir. I welcome all the participants and our resource person, including our principal himself, in this today's certificate course on today's last day of 1 week certificate course on human rights, which is jointly organized by Department of Law, University of Mumbai, in collaboration with University of Mumbai Law Academy and NTLM's BL Amlani College of Commerce and Economics. This is the last day of our 1 week certificate course on human rights, and we have resource person who will guide us, uh, Professor Sheetal Setia. He is professor at Department of Law, University of Mumbai. Today he will have his lecture, and he will guide us. He will teach us the topic, the given topic, and I kindly request to our principal, Dr. Jitendra Aherkar sir, to have few words with us. Okay, sir.
Sir, you can start now.
Right, right. So thank you so very much, Dr. Herker, and for the uh, opportunity today to interact with the participants of this human rights program. I also would like to thank Dr. Swati Rotela from the Department of Law, and also she's the director of University of Mumbai Law Academy, for facilitating this exchange with the students. Now, this talk today, this is supposed to be on contemporary issues in human rights. So contemporary issues are very many. There are quite a few of them. So since we cannot take up absolutely all of them in one single talk, I'd like to talk about a few of them on which I think, we need the maximum focus. And that would be my aim through this talk. And for all the participants in this program, uh, feel free. You're most welcome to interject. You're most welcome to ask anything at any time in the course of this talk. Let it not be too formalized lecture, and let it be a form of interaction. I'd love to have inputs from the participants in the course of this talk. Now, regarding contemporary issues in human rights, there are a few things that have been coming up lately. One, and that is something very important for us who are a part, or who have been seen to be a part of the third world, that human rights jurisprudence, if we try to look at it, it although has its roots in natural law, but since the idea of natural law had been manipulated, had been interpreted in various ways, in the post-war era, in the post-Second World War era, when this idea was brought in and it was presented at an international level, we started using the term human rights. And in case of these human rights, at the stage when they started coming to the fore in the 1940s, in the post-war era, at that stage, what we saw was that a lot of countries throughout the world were still colonies. In fact, when India joined the United Nations, because India was one of the founding members in 1945, so at that time, India was also a British colony. At that stage, the intelligentsia in most of the countries who were colonies of the Western world, uh, they were also drawn from the education systems which were developed by these countries. The exposure to education of all the experts, of the learned people from these parts of the world, from what we call the third world today, uh, this was more or less this exposure to education was more or less on the lines of the Western pattern of education. What that did, and this is the understanding that the inputs into human rights jurisprudence at that stage were done with a more or less Western standpoint. The human rights, the content of human rights as we see today, as we understand it, is more in furtherance of what the Western world sees as the rights that should be there with all human beings. So there is an element of subjectivity when it comes to the should be element of the rights. So human rights are those rights which are enjoyed by all human beings throughout the world, which are supposed to be inherent in them because of their being human. But at the same time, what the contents of those rights should be. This jurisprudence, as it emerged in the 1940s, the concerns nowadays are that it was more or less West driven. It reflected the ethos, it reflected the values, it reflected the morals of the Western world. Uh, what I mean by that is that at that time, the input that we should have seen from other civilizations, from other cultures throughout the world, that was not enough. Even if these countries like India or Pakistan or Bangladesh didn't exist at that time, of course, but later it became a part of the United Nations. Then, Nigeria, or Kenya, or Rhodesia, which later became Zimbabwe. Now, the inputs which would come from these, since the people representing these countries were again drawn from the Western approaches, they were drawn from the Western education systems. The ideas that came in from these places were not drawn from the traditional culture and ethos of these parts of the world, but were drawn from the Western education system to which people representing these countries at that stage were exposed. So what we saw was that the inputs into human rights jurisprudence, because of that, although it was easy to build consensus in such a situation, of course, since primarily these rights were premised, these rights were based on the Western understanding, and there was everyone who was in agreement with them. So it was easy to draw a consensus. But then bringing in an idea that applies to the whole world should have inputs from the whole world. So the diversity in thought, the diversity in beliefs, the diversity in values, the diversity in ethos that are there throughout the world, those did not at that stage become a part of human rights jurisprudence. That is why what is happening now, when in these countries there was decolonization, then of course the effect of the Western education systems continued. The Western education systems continued to be eulogized by the intelligentsia, by the educated classes in these communities for quite some time. But since now we have had 2 or 3 generations that have passed since that point in time, now we can perhaps give it a relook and see how accurate or how reflective of our ethos, how reflective of our belief, how reflective of our morals the human rights are. So, yes, the idea of human rights, yes, they are seen to be universal, but this universality should not be a universality of imposition, universality of presentation by one and acceptance by the others, but a universality that where the inputs are also taken from throughout the world and they are accepted by everyone. So one part of the world becoming the source of the content of the rights and the rest of the world accepting that would not be a very fair reflection of what the world believes and what the world thinks. So that is why we see a lot of conflict between the human rights jurisprudence on the one hand, that is the dominant talk in the international sphere. Uh, However, in the rest of the world, the same ideas do not always come to be accepted in a similar manner. So there are so many cultures throughout the world who resist the influence of human rights agencies, who resist the effect or the impact of the entities promoting the idea of human rights. Now we know that just to take an example, uh, we have this human right to education also, which is recognized. It's one of the second generation human rights. So right to education also comes as one of the human rights, right to gain education. And it is in furtherance of the same we have seen Nobel Prizes being awarded. Malala Yousafzai got a Nobel Prize, because they wanted to further this idea of education among women. So, but this why is this idea of education being resisted in many parts of the world? Why is it seen to be against or a challenge to civilizations in other parts of the world? So in Afghanistan, for example, or in the northwestern part of Pakistan, where Malala Yousafzai comes from, why was there resistance to this education being imparted to women? So that this shows that the way we evolved human rights, this did not involve everyone. This did not have inputs from everyone. This did not have contribution from the rest of the civilizations of the world. So it is in furtherance of that now that we are seeing development of fourth generation human rights, and maybe in the future, fifth generation human rights, which are in the course of their evolution, which are still growing. So this is one of the concerns regarding human rights. This is one of the contemporary issues of human rights, I think, that we should talk about, that we should think about, and that we should reflect upon. That human rights, as they exist today, they might be a reflection of values of someone else, and the inputs that we should have had made, the input of a large part of the world. So India itself represents almost 1/6 of humanity. China, the same, it even has an even bigger population. How much of human rights of today have been, how much of the content of human rights today has been contributed by us? How much of it reflects our traditions, our beliefs, our ethos, our societal norms? So this is a dilemma that we face today, and I think this is something that should grow, that should evolve, and the human rights as they exist today, they must change, they must reform, and they must be more inclusive of the diverse cultures, the diverse nations, the various value systems, the various forms of morality that we see around the world. It should not happen that an idea like education should be resisted by a community on the basis or on the pretext of its culture, protection of its culture. So education being brought in should not be, because we see it as a human right. Education, which comes as a human right, which is a universal right, this should not, the resistance to that or the opposition to that, why, how can it be so widespread if it is, if it is universal, if it should be acceptable by everyone? It is not just a few vested interests working against it. There's actual belief that this is not reflective of the ethos of the society to which it is applying. So uh, I think one of the challenges is to gather the support of various different cultures, various different societies, various different religions, various different uh, customary belief systems, various different civilizational or cultural entities throughout the world, nations throughout the world, uh, so that each of them feels a part of this human rights framework. Human rights framework should not be seen as something that belongs to somebody else, that has been brought in by somebody else, which has been imposed upon the rest. So, a participative idea of human rights, an inclusive idea of human rights, a broad based idea of human rights, that I think is one of the concerns that we should be talking about. We should work towards the furtherance of this idea. Another issue in the contemporary times that has been talked about over and over again is how science and technology has come to affect our human rights. Now, the reflection, the impact of science and technology on human rights has been immense. Uh, no, this technology, science and technology is always a double-edged sword. It can be beneficial on the one hand, and it can have a negative impact as well on the other. So technology by itself is neutral. It can be utilized by us in either direction, either in furtherance of human rights or in or against the idea of human rights. In this regard, one example I think we can start with is that now we have deciphered, we have been able to map the human genome. Now, the gene sequences that are there inside human beings and how they might affect our health, since there are many medical issues which are there, which are uh, based on our genetic makeup. Uh, these also now can be predicted, or the likelihood of such a problem arising can be known by looking at our genetic makeup. So we can look at the genes. Let's suppose I do my gene test. From the genes that would be detected in that, it can be known as to what medical problems I am more vulnerable to, uh, at least in case of some of those medical problems which are affected by genetic makeup. Now, what problem does that bring? What concerns does this bring? On the one hand, this is further knowledge. That is, by itself, knowledge is not harmful. But what are the concerns regarding human rights? How can this knowledge be used for negative purposes? How can this be used to, how can this lead to certain into challenges to human rights? Now, this let's look at it in the context of insurance, for example. Now, when I buy life insurance or if I buy medical insurance, I have to reveal everything that I know about my own health, right? So when I buy life insurance or when I buy medical insurance, I have to give to the insurance company or the insurers whatever information I have regarding my health, which can have a bearing on the insurance or the payments that would result out of insurance. So they can decide their premium on the basis of the risk that I am exposed to. If I'm more vulnerable, if I'm more likely to be, to die early or to die or to be affected by medical problems, then their premium would be higher. And if I'm less likely to be affected, my premium would be lower. Now, on the face of it, it appears very fair. But what happens as science and technology advances? Now, in insurance, we have this system where we have to reveal everything that we know about ourselves. So it is a contract of what is known as utmost good faith, where all information that we have, which can have a bearing on the payment that would result out of insurance, that has to be conveyed to the other party, so that the premiums can be fairly decided, and the insurer can make a fair assessment as to whether the insurer would like to offer insurance to the prospective candidate who is applying for insurance, to that person or not. So insurance company can choose whether they want to give us insurance or not, one, and two, they can decide on the premium on the basis of risk. As we decipher this human genome further, can the insurance companies ask our genetic details also from us? Can they take samples of our DNA and get them tested and then decide on the premium that they would charge us? Well, technically speaking, yes. They perhaps they can. It is our duty to reveal everything that is associated with some that is associated with the premium amount that would be calculated on the contract. Now, what if from my genetic makeup they are able to know that I'm vulnerable to a certain medical problem? They can raise my premium. So what this does is that the sections of society who are more vulnerable to being affected, who are more vulnerable to being uh, uh, to health problems, they would be offered premium. They would be offered insurance that is more expensive in terms of premium, and those who are less vulnerable, they would be offered insurance at a lesser premium. So this was when this technology was not advanced enough, or the scientific knowledge in this regard was not advanced enough, they would have received insurance benefits at the same cost. So what this does is, as science and technology advances, it makes the vulnerable sections of society more prone to, or they are less likely to gain benefits from the prevailing health systems. So this would exclude, if the premium is high, I might not be able to afford my insurance. So which means that I would, in spite of being more vulnerable, I'm less likely to be benefited by the health system through insurance. So what this shows is that as science and technology advances, concerns arise, because the scientific knowledge that results out of it, or technological development that results out of it, they can make vulnerable sections more vulnerable, and the less vulnerable sections even less vulnerable. So this increases the gap between different human beings. So the idea of human rights jurisprudence, the idea of being treated equally, the idea of equity and human rights, which work together, which work hand in hand, that comes under stress as science and technology advances. So we talked about the human genome here, genetic makeup, how genetic makeup of ours can let the experts know, can let the scientists know what our medical problems in the future are going to be. Now, I might carry a gene that makes me more likely to be affected by a certain medical problem. It is not necessary that I will definitely get that medical problem. But just because my insurer knows that I'm likely to get it, or there is a chance that I might be affected by it, or I'm more likely to be affected by it than others, that is a good reason for them to charge a higher premium from me, even if I might not be affected by the same. So which means they try to predict what problems I might face medically, and then they decide on my premium. So this predictive assessment can be detrimental to the interests of the vulnerable sections of society, the ones who are more vulnerable to health problems. For them, healthcare would be more expensive. So this is exclusionary. This is something that keeps sections of human beings out from the benefits of health systems. So any mechanism that excludes the vulnerable from health systems, that would be a violation of the violation of human rights. Moving further, another technology that is growing very fast is computing technology. What we see is that computing power throughout the world, it's increasing rapidly, and it is said that every couple of years, the computing power that is available to human beings doubles. Now, if computing power doubles, what does it lead to? They say that it leads to greater volume of information that can be collected, then greater variety of information that can be collected. Different kinds of information also comes in. One is volume in terms of quantity, more information is there. Number two, the types of information, the variety of information that can increase. And third, the velocity of information, the effect that it can have on our day-to-day lives, that also increases. So as computing power increases, they say that these three V's, the volume, the the velocity is the third one. The volume, variety, and velocity, all three of them, they become greater, and this can have, an adverse impact of human rights. This is becoming a huge concern now. What is happening with technological development? What is happening with the computing? If you look specifically at that, let's look at that. That is one of the concerns, very important contemporary issues. One form of technology that is growing at the present time is artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence is uh, where certain algorithms which exist in computing systems, they can self-learn from the experience they are exposed to. So as greater inputs, as more and more data goes into them, they move on further to work on the basis of that. So what this does is that this creates a software that doesn't work merely as per how it was created. It is a software that adds to itself. It is a software that uh, adds to its own knowledge on its own and acts in furtherance of the same. But the way it grows in its knowledge, the way it works further on the basis of the inputs, this depends a lot on what the original inputs were, right? So the algorithmic issues, which are if they are there right in the beginning, they might be further perpetuated and multiplied. They might be further magnified as the software learns more and more. Uh, all right, let's look at it in terms of examples. I read about an example that was quoted in an article by the Brookings Institution recently. And they talked about this company, Amazon. They said they created an automated recruitment system. So wherein, people would not be interviewed by the HR department of the company. People would be interviewed by a computer. A computer would, it already had an algorithm in it, and this algorithm was self-learning. It worked, or it gained knowledge from its own experience, from its own functioning. As it worked further, it gathered more and more data and uh, processed that data in a manner that, uh, you know, for the purpose of recruitment, the company had laid down certain parameters. So it was able to assess whether those candidates fitted those parameters, and it could recruit on the basis of that. So this was a software that was meant for recruitment of people without without much use of human input. So what did that do? When it recruited, what it resulted in was that it recruited more men than women. Now, this was already a problem with Amazon. The equality advocates have already been pointing out that the participation of women in the Amazon's workforce. Amazon is a huge company; it's a very big concern. So, And in such huge concerns, it becomes one of the issues that whether they are inclusive enough, whether they are including the various sections of the society within their workforce or not, whether they are allowing everyone to participate in employment or not. So Amazon's workforce was already men heavy. It already had more men than women in the workforce. So this is something, if a human being were to conduct recruitments, they would try to attempt to address this imbalance that was already in existence. But what did the artificial intelligence do? It focused more and more on what the company's requirements were as per the original input. So, it resulted in skewing that imbalance further. So, it included or it selected more men than women in a company where already there were more men. So, what it can do, what technology can, what this artificial intelligence and machine learning can sometimes do is to exaggerate and perpetuate certain biases which are originally there in our human thinking also. Because just as a human adds on to uh, its knowledge and its uh, uh, you can say just as a human interacts with people, gathers more data, and uh, forms opinions and acts in furtherance of the same. Similarly, this computer system, this algorithm, this machine also was doing something similar. But just because there was a bias right in the beginning, that bias became more exaggerated as it worked further. So if we allow systems to become automated, these such concerns exist. So I'm not trying to say that technology is bad. I'm not at all trying to say that technology is against human rights. Technology can be used in furtherance of human rights also. Technology can be, in fact, very positively used in furtherance of human rights. But at the same time, we must develop safeguards as to how we use technology. Because this technology, as I said in the beginning, is a double-edged sword. It can work to the furtherance of human rights on the one hand, and it can also work to or turn out to be a big challenge or a big concern regarding human rights. Regarding artificial intelligence, if we talk about it, one of the more important concerns in human rights that we see, regarding which a lot of talk is happening throughout the world. Whenever we look at the various forums where human rights are being discussed, this is a very important issue, and this is a burning issue currently. And that is the use of artificial intelligence for predictive policing. Now, what is this all about? What is predictive policing? Predictive policing is all about trying to assess beforehand as to who and where is going to be violating the law. So predictive policing is where, using artificial intelligence, we try to know where violation of law might happen in the future and who might do it. Now, for this purpose, we sometimes use like face detection software, for example. Yeah. So we have cameras installed at various points in various cities throughout the world. These cameras can capture images. They can identify whether, as soon as we come in front of a system like that, it can detect that the face has come in front of it, and it can take a record of the same, make a record of the same, take a picture of the same. This happens when I walk into the university and there's a biometric attendance system. So I go, I stand in front of the machine. It automatically detects that there's a face in front of it. And since my data is already there in the system, it can detect who I am and it marks my attendance. It shows on the screen my employment number. So it is a similar technology that we have that is installed all over the city. We have these cameras, and these cameras are connected to very powerful computing systems. These cameras are not merely for viewing what is happening. That was the old idea. Nowadays, these cameras are connected to very powerful computing systems where it can be known who is the person at a certain place. How can they know who the person is? There's a lot of data about us that is already there with the state, whether it is through when we get our driving license made, when we get our Aadhaar card made, when we get our voter ID card made, we submit our photographs, we submit our pictures. So that becomes a part of the big database. I'm not saying that in India this data is being used for this purpose. There are limitations that have been put on the same. Uh, we saw that in the Puttaswamy judgment, but I'm talking in terms of just an example, just to explain this point further, that there's a lot of data regarding us, regarding our looks, regarding the way we appear, that might already be there with the state. Now, if the state uses these cameras and they can detect where we are going or where we are standing at any point in time, this is a gross violation of our privacy. So I cannot go anonymously. Let's suppose I drive from the university campus in Kalina to the university campus in Fort. On the way, there might be various cameras. I might just cross through those areas, but they'll be able to detect from where all I have been crossing. So which means that where I go or where I travel, this is supposed to be my personal information. This is supposed to be my private information. Who I visit, this is supposed to be my private information. This goes into the hands of the state, right? So this is one part, but this is the privacy part of things. This can become more concerning when it is used for predictive policing. How is this used for predictive policing? Well, there are certain people with certain kinds of looks who have been involved in crimes in the past, or who have been involved in certain riots, or been involved in certain demonstrations, protests in the past. If the same set of people or similar looking people, where if they start gathering at another place, the predictive policing system will be able to detect that, right? If let's suppose there's a certain kind of turban which people wear who have been protesting in the past, or who have been wearing a certain kind of headgear or certain kind of look that they carry, if they have been involved in a certain kind of legal violation in the past, the system will detect if similar people gather at another place. So what this does is that the biases that we have as human beings, they get further exaggerated and perpetuated in in artificial intelligence, and these systems work in furtherance of those biases. So when it comes to things like artificial intelligence, predictive policing, now let's remember, we are talking about predictive policing. We are talking about people who are likely to do something. Now, what happens to those people then if the system detects? They'll be under greater scrutiny, right? They'll be under greater monitoring, which again would become a violation of privacy. So it's this is just one part of the story. I'm not saying that artificial intelligence is a bad technology. It's very useful when it comes to humanitarian aid, where they'll be able to detect where human beings are, or if they are stuck in a certain flood, or if they are stuck at a certain place or in a certain earthquake where it is difficult for human beings to reach. Let's suppose there's a tragedy that has happened somewhere in the high mountains, and human beings are not able to reach there. So using technology, we can use drones, we can attach these cameras which can detect human beings, and they can help out in humanitarian aid also. They can help in protection of human rights also. This is not something that is entirely negative, but the concern is that this can be used for violation of human rights also. uh, we know that this kind of intelligence systems, this kind of identification systems, photo identification systems through cameras, face detection systems, they have been used in the past in the case of drone attacks. You know, the recent conflict that we saw when Nagorno-Karabakh between Azerbaijan, supported by Turkey on the one side and Armenia on the other, there was a lot of use of drones in the attacks. So drone technology and its use for violence, this is increasing. So these drones, just as they could identify soldiers on the other side and attack and fire at them, similarly, that is the something that comes as a challenge to human rights. At the same time, these same drones can detect human beings and provide aid to them in case of difficulties. So technology by itself is neutral. It is the concerns regarding the same that are there, regarding the form of use that they might be put to. That is a challenge to human rights. So these are some of the contemporary issues that I wanted to raise. These are some of the contemporary issues I wanted to talk about. And I'd like to listen to your inputs, and then we can carry this session further. What are your responses to this? Yeah. Anyone? I'm told that there are a lot of young people in the audience, people who are young students in their late teenage or early 20s. So that I feel is a time in life when there's a lot of curiosity. There's a the urge to ask questions is still very healthy. So I expect an interaction in this regard. Yes, please. Yes, sir. All right then. Then I can perhaps, the things that I wanted to bring up during the interaction, well, I can perhaps continue with that. Now, these concerns regarding human rights, particularly when it comes to predictive policing, this can become a serious concern when it comes to vulnerable sections of society, whether we are talking about vulnerability on the basis of gender, vulnerability on the basis of sexual orientation, vulnerability on the basis of race, vulnerability on the basis of any other identity or even citizenship. Now, we understand that India is a very diverse country. In case of India, we are more concerned about this, because India being a diverse country, a very diverse country, we have a lot of racial diversity, we have a lot of ethnic diversity, we have a lot of cultural diversity, we have a lot of religious diversity, and various other forms of diversity that we see. Now, in such a society, biases towards other communities are a social reality. Biases about other sections. So today, if we use these predictive technologies to protect ourselves from people who are crossing borders from other countries into our country, it can be used for, and it is being used in many parts of the world for monitoring movements across the border. The same in the future might be used. There is a concern for people who are traveling within the country also. You see, we Indians, constitutionally speaking, we have a right to move, to visit any part of the country. There is a freedom of movement that is included as a part of our right to freedom under Article 19. However, you know, when it comes to biases, we see that there is a resistance to people of some areas coming into other areas, and because the people in other areas tend to be concerned that people from places other than their own, they might come and take over the jobs, they might come and take over the economic opportunities. So due to that, there are inherent biases. So what if these technologies tend to be used for restricting movement within the country, when they start challenging movements within the country? So those concerns which are there, and those can be uh, those are something we need to protect against. So what can we do regarding this? What we can do regarding this is that we have to develop our regulation of human rights in a manner that it keeps pace with technological development. So it is a cat and mouse race. So we have to assess where technology might reach in the future, because when we legislate, when we make laws, those laws are supposed to be implemented in the future. Those laws are supposed to be applied, or they become functional in the future. So we have to assess what this might lead to and legislate accordingly from time to time, so that misuse of technology for challenges, for challenging human rights, for bringing human rights, for making human rights less accessible, that does not happen. So technology and science, as it grows, let's hope that it is used further for beneficial purposes and furtherance of human rights, rather than being used to work against it. With this, I bring today's talk to a close. Over to the organizers for
Thank you very
further
much,
talk.
sir. Uh, I would like to ask all the participants if they have any questions, please ask. Uh, Sir is requesting you to have interaction with you so that your doubts will be cleared. This is the opportunity to ask any doubt. Sir is there to answer. So take your time and please send messages. If you are not able to speak, then write your messages in chat in any language, Hindi or English. Sir, if you don't have any problem, then we will wait for a minute. If someone sends something,
Sure,
then
sure, most
we'll
welcome.
have the interaction.
I'd be happy to. Yes.
Okay, sir, I assume that no participant has any doubt to ask. And I thank you
Fine.
very much. I thank you very much personally also, and on behalf of all the participants,
That's absolutely
on behalf of MKLM's Amlani College of Commerce and Economics. And I appreciate the way in which you explain all the details and topics, and with the simplicity you elaborated all the concepts, all the examples you gave. I really appreciate. Thank you. And I allow you to. I request you, if you want to end up this meeting, you can leave the meeting. And thank you very much once again.
Right. It's so kind of you for having allowed me this chance to interact with all the students and all the participants today. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you so much.